Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go, guys. We open it up today with the Cleveland, Ohio show with American Sports History Podcast, hosted by my good friend Peter Ray. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing this. 347-205-9631. This thing goes quick. So catch the archive version on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. Podcast platforms powered by Mancini Media. So as I lay the red carpet down, put the podium in its place, and we're live. We're not doing tape delays like the Oscars here. I'll hand off the mic to you, Peter. First of all, how are you? Second of all, how can people get a hold of you? Third of all, you got one hell of a guest again on the show.
Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter J. Ray, R-E-A, and we've made history videos. You're absolutely right. Tonight's guest had 20 years as a TV network sports work, various high school, college pros. He's from the great state of Connecticut, fan of the Mets, Steelers, Knicks, and really a very knowledgeable guy going back to the late 70s in pro sports. Welcome to the show, Fred Gerteiny.
Peter, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's an honor, and I think that's the nice way of introducing me as an old guy. I appreciate it.
Right. Well, it's nice to talk to older. I'm an old guy myself, and it's nice to, for me, this stuff is the 70s is very real, and actually, if you get into sports, even before my time, it's nice to learn so many interesting guys from the various eras of sports. First of all, Fred, can you tell us about your interest? 20 years in TV network sports. Can you tell us about your work doing that?
Well, I was a local sports TV anchor and producer, beginning with the ABC affiliate in New Haven, Connecticut. I was a producer. And then I went down to Florida and became a reporter down in Central Florida, news and feature reporter, and then I came back up to Connecticut to News 12 Connecticut, where I was first I was the weekend sports anchor and eventually the sports director, and now I'm working for an all-digital network called the Sports Notoriety Network. It's brand new, it's all digital, and having a lot of fun with that and getting that off the ground, and it's been a wonderful career, and I'm lucky to still be going.
Now, we talked about your interest in teams, and can you talk about the 1986 New York Mets?
Oh, I could talk about the 1986 New York Mets till I'm blue in the face. What a great team that was. If you'll remember those Met teams in the 80s, they were cocky, they were arrogant, they had the great pitching. Doc Gooden at the top of the rotation, and Ron Darling and Bobby Ojeda and Sid Hernandez. They were really they were really anchored by their pitching, but they had a great lineup. They had Keith Hernandez and Darryl Strawberry and Lenny Dykstra, Mookie Wilson. It was a wonderful team of characters, and they were really a bunch of I guess they were kind of the Animal House team of baseball. They were partiers. They were hard living guys. I mean, we all know that Darryl Strawberry and Doc Gooden had issues with drugs. And then the interesting thing was even the manager, Davey Johnson, would party with him. He was a guy who fit in perfectly managing that team. And then you had a couple of guys who were born-again Christians. Gary Carter, of course, the great catcher, and Mookie Wilson, who they would not partake in all of those shenanigans. They were sort of outsiders because they didn't drink, they didn't smoke. They were kind of a different slice of the pie, and you had an interesting dichotomy there between Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter, who were really the two leaders of the team, and they were polar opposites of each other. And there's always this sort of battle as to who was the real leader of that team between Keith and Kid Carter. Gary Carter, of course, sadly passed away a few years ago from brain cancer. But that was really a great team. It was just, and it's amazing that they only won one World Series during those mid-'80s when they were just such a dominant team.
Yeah, I think the '86 World Series will always be beloved and one of the most popular and dramatic. And And since it involved the Red Sox, and going 7 and not making it, you get into that whole aspect. And it's funny how when teams win World Series, it's like the guys on the team have like an aura, like, oh wow, he won a World. So then they become attractive. Cleveland ended up. We picked up Keith Hernandez at the end of his career, and Doc Gooden for a year or two, and I think Rafael Santana, the second baseman. Is that right? And so anyway, hoping that it would shortstop, hoping it would rub off on us. So anyway, it's funny when you study pro sports. It's good to know some geography, and I've come to see the state of New Jersey is sort of a battleground between Philadelphia, since it's between these two cities, Philadelphia and New York. It's kind of a battleground of sports fans that, not a big state, but these two big cities near right on either side. And the same thing with Connecticut. And it's interesting because in the '86 series you had it's between Boston and New York. So Connecticut was like in the middle of this war for the World Series. So do you have any thoughts on that about living in Connecticut and what it's like being a sports fan there, and how that works out with the two cities vying for fans in Connecticut?
Well, it's interesting, Peter, because Connecticut, as you know, is a very small state, but it's sort of split in half between if you're Hartford North, you're Boston fans. You're Red Sox, Patriots, Bruins, Celtics. But if you're on the other side of Hartford, if you're from Hartford south down into Lower Fairfield County, going toward New York City, you're for the New York teams. So it's really kind of a split. It's about a 50-50 split as to whether you're a New York or a Boston fan. That's just where Connecticut's situated. But boy, that rivalry between New York and Boston is just, obviously the Yankees and the Red Sox is just off the charts. And then you got Jets Patriots is a big rivalry, and Celtics Knicks. So it's really an interesting part of the country. You got all those little tiny states there in New England, and you got big New York, and most of New England. If you go up to Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, they're all solid Boston fans. Rhode Island. So it is an interesting part of the country, and there's a split there between New York and Boston fans.
It's interesting today. The money angle of sports has gotten much more important, and then you have teams like Cleveland. You have cities like Cleveland and New York. New York probably has 20 times the money, and so it's tough for Cleveland's got teams like Cleveland. They've got to really be on the ball to compete, and I lost my train of thought here. I was thinking. I was thinking about the Knicks. The Knicks are the one. You're a Knicks fan, and Knicks haven't won an NBA Finals in like 50 years, something like that. They have gotten to the finals a couple times, I think. But I've been kind of surprised over the lack of success of the New York Knicks over the years. Do you have any explanation, considering the advantages they have in terms of money?
Well, first of all, you got the salary cap in basketball. If James Dolan, the Knicks owner, had the ability to spend as much money as he wanted, he'd have everybody. He'd have LeBron, he'd have Michael Jordan, he'd have had everybody over the years, but he's got that cap which works against him. And he's a terrible owner to begin with. I mean, he's a lunatic, and nobody wants to play there because of him. So you've got it's a sort of a combination thing. It's the cap and it's Jim Dolan. So that's been the problem. They've just been so mismanaged. You had the years where Isaiah Thomas was in charge. They've gone through general managers like Water. It's been a mess. And finally they have some direction now because Jim Dolan has decided this hasn't worked. So he's hands off. He's hand things over to the new president, Leon Rose, a former sports agent, and his compadre there, Worldwide West, as they call him, another sports agent. And then they did the smart thing this year, and they hired Tom Thibodeau, who's a brilliant coach, who gets the most out of his players, who's got the Knicks back to their days when Pat Riley and Jeff Van Gundy were around, and they're built on defense and rebounding, and they're back. And they've got a young star in Julius Randle, who should be in the MVP conversation this year, and they've got a terrific young player in R.J. Barrett out of Duke, and they're building around those two guys, and all of a sudden the Garden is the place to be again. And even with the Brooklyn Nets, with their big three, stealing all the headlines and everybody favoring them to win the NBA title, the Knicks are still the team of New York, and it's amazing that they are overshadowing that great Brooklyn Nets team, because that Brooklyn Nets team just might win the whole darn thing.
Is Walt Frazier your favorite New York Knick of all time?
Well, he not only is he my favorite Knick, he's my favorite color analyst, because he's just he has this very unique style. Not only the clothes, with the fur coats and everything, but he has this unique way of broadcasting the game. Everything is a rhyme, tenacious and vivacious, and things like that. And he's great. I mean, he is a New York icon. All those, the guys from those 70s Knicks teams, Bill Bradley, the former senator, and Dave DeBusschere, and Willis Reed, and what a great team that was. I mean, they played a beautiful brand of basketball that you just don't see anymore today with everybody shooting threes, right?
We picked the Cleveland Cavaliers picked up Walt Frazier. We had Clyde, and I was just a young guy, and I was oh my gosh, was I excited and happy. And I look back on it. I've always looked back on it and thought, here you have Walt Frazier. He's playing for the Knicks. He plays a game, steps out after the game into the New York nightlife there outside of Madison Square Garden, and he's ready to party. And he comes to Cleveland, and we were playing in Richfield, Ohio, and after a Cavs game, he'd step out of the arena and there's like a cornfield there, and I thought, oh, the poor guy gets traded to Cleveland, and boy, does it disrupt his lifestyle.
Yeah, he often talks about that. He had nothing against the city of Cleveland or the people. It was such a come down for him. Because he was all about the nightlife of New York City and being a star, and he went to Cleveland, which is, compared to New York City, it's kind of a sleepy town, and it was very hard for him to adjust to that. And it was the tail end of his career, so he wasn't the same player. So there was that aspect of it. So he wasn't producing the way he did with the Knicks, and now he's in this sleepy town. He's like a fish out of water. And it was a very, very difficult adjustment for him.
Yeah, and especially the Cavs had moved out away from, they weren't downtown Cleveland. They were out in the middle of nowhere trying to draw fans from Akron, Ohio as well. And it was pretty crazy idea that they came up with. But, I think I read a book by Walt Frazier, and the thing that struck me, and I guess all these many years he's been broadcasting Knicks games, and he said that very few Knicks players over the years, like less than 5, have ever approached him and asked him anything about the game. And here he's right there, they're there, he's there, and all these players that have come and gone, and very few of them had the wisdom to think, hey, it's Walt. Maybe they didn't even know, because people's memory is so limited, and our sense of history is not good. And very few came to have spoken with him and talked about basketball and tried to learn from him.
Well, I think that's a problem with the young players today. They don't appreciate history. I mean, if they did, they would ask Walt Clyde Frazier every question in the book, because the man knows basketball, and he's such an icon, part of New York sports lore and Knicks history. And I'll tell you what, the one guy who seems to be doing that is Julius Randle. Julius really has sort of taken a liking to Clyde, and he really appreciates the history and what Clyde Frazier meant to the New York Knicks organization. And it's nice to see. Most of the other young players, they're like, Clyde Frazier, who's that? And that's sad. That's sad. I mean, I just think that's a part of the youth today. They just don't appreciate history. They're looking at their cell phones and their tablets, and everything's instantaneous, and it's just a different breed of kid today. They just don't appreciate history.
Well, it's interesting. We live in the present, and I'm a historian, so I tend to be living in the past a lot through my thinking and research and so forth. And but now you're involved with this Notoriety Sports Network and involving with MLB Today. So what is the current state of MLB so we don't completely lose? Of course, you are involved with this. So what's the state of MLB today?
Well, I think baseball is a healthy sport. And obviously the last year has hurt everybody with the pandemic. Teams lost money. But I think the sport in general is healthy. They are, one of the complaints about baseball is that they're losing the new generation of fans because they play World Series games so late at night. They used to, you and I remember, Peter, when they played afternoon games in the playoffs in the World Series. And, obviously the Cubs still play a lot of afternoon games, but they play the games at night. The game is slow. The kids today, their attention span is so short that they prefer the faster sports. They love basketball. They prefer football. So baseball for today's youth is just too slow and boring, and it's played too late at night, and they're losing a whole generation of fans. So that may hurt them down the road. But right now, I think the game is pretty healthy. I think they've got a lot of big stars, and they've got a great TV deal with ESPN and MLB Network. They got their own network, so the game is healthy, and I think it's still America's pastime, but it's losing ground to the NFL and to the NBA, and but I think the game is in good shape, and I think the future is bright.
Are there too many strikeouts and home runs?
Absolutely, and that all goes back to how the metrics have taken over the game, and I think you and I talked about this the other night, how the Ivy League 28-year-olds are running these baseball teams now. It's the whole Moneyball thing that started with Billy Beane and the Oakland A's, and everybody just crunches the numbers. Everything is on base. Everything is you got to hit home runs. So now it's all strikeout or home run. I can remember, I remember Dave Kingman, that type of hitter. So it was, strikeout or hit a ball 9 miles, and that's what everybody wants now. And I think that's hurting the game. I know that chicks dig the long ball, as Tom Glavine once said with the Atlanta Braves in that famous commercial. But we come from a generation where you play small ball, where you slap the ball around, you move the runner over. The art of bunting is completely out of the game. So it is a different game. There's no question about it. But like I said, I think the game is healthy. I think the ratings are good, and we'll see. I think the future is bright.
What do the 1969 Mets mean to you?
Well, I was awfully young back then, but as a historian like you, that was one of the great stories in the history of the game. Here was a team that was, the lovable losers. The 62 Mets who lost 120 games, and Casey Stengel was their manager back then, legendary manager who came to manage these lovable losers. And it wasn't until a guy named Tom Seaver came along in 1967 out of USC and turned the franchise completely around. It was amazing how one guy made a difference, and they went from losers to winners in remarkable fashion, winning 100 games and beating the heavily favored Baltimore Orioles in that World Series. It was one of the great stories in baseball history, the Amazing Mets, as they were called. And they took the city of New York and the country by storm. They were just a great, great Cinderella story.
Yeah, I was 9 years old. I wasn't following baseball, but, if you become a fan, you get into the history. And so I've been captivated by the 69 Mets and the catch by Swoboda, I think, and the catch by Agee. And we had Tommy Agee earlier as a young guy, and, that whole story of that team. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Frequency. It's a time travel thing where the guy's kind of confusing, but the guy is trying to convince this other guy that he's, communicating with his son from the past, and he says, and it's during the '69 series, and he's communicating with his son from the future. He goes, I can tell you, Tom, Cleon Jones is about to get hit on his shoe, and he'll say no, and he'll say, check the shoe polish, and of course that's what happened, and the guy's all happy and realizes he's telling the truth. He's communicating with his son in the future. But that was a great moment, the Cleon Jones thing with his shoe polish. But the '69 Mets, forever the Amazons. So that's I think all baseball fans enjoy stuff like that. It was awful shame losing Tom Seaver. Everybody I felt very sad losing Tom Terrific.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was June 15th, 1977 was the night that they traded him to the Cincinnati Reds for five guys who no one had ever heard of. And it was a brutal night because they also traded Dave Kingman that night to the San Diego Padres. So M. Donald Grant, who was the team president back then, just decided that he couldn't afford Tom Seaver. Tom Seaver was asking too much money. He was the franchise, and it devastated the city because I can remember as a kid, I think I was like 13 years old, and it was just, it was painful to trade. You don't trade Tom Seaver. He's the franchise, and that was, I think they got, let's see, I think I can remember who they got in that trade. Pat Zachary was a right-handed pitcher, Doug Flynn, a second baseman, Steve Henderson, a left fielder, another young guy named Dan Norman, Stormin' Dan Norman. None of them ever amounted to anything. I think Doug Flynn won a Gold Glove at second base, but they got really just a bag of balls for the franchise. And when he came back that season with the Reds, the place they sold Shea Stadium out, and he pitched a complete game. They won 6-1, I think, the Reds. Just one of the real travesties of the New York Met organization that they could trade Tom Terrific, and it was heartbreaking.
Should Gil Hodges be in the Hall of Fame?
Boy, that's a tough one. It's something that's debated in New York City. He was a really good player. He was a great first baseman, but I think the fact that he led the Mets to the World Series as their manager, I think should get him into the Hall of Fame. So I think he should be.
Yeah, there's a great title of a book. It's called Say a Prayer for Gil Hodges, about the '55 Brooklyn Dodgers, where this the story of the Catholic priest. It's summer, it's hot. The priest says it's too hot for a homily. Pray the rosary and say a prayer for Gil Hodges, who is like batting 200 or under 200. And then it's the title of this book about the 55. And I guess the fact that he was with the 55 Brooklyn Dodgers, their only title before they tragically are taken away, that also would be in his favor.
Yeah, he wasn't a great player, but he was a serviceable player. But leading the Mets to the World Series, that miracle Mets team, I think that should get him in. I think sometimes they think you got to have pea and chips to get in, but he's got one as a player, so I think he should get in.
One of my favorite quotes was, "You got to believe Tug McGraw, the '73 Mets, Yogi Berra manager, Willie Mays at the very end of his career, the 70 and Pete Rose and Bud Harrelson having their fight in the infield, and that was you want to talk about the '73 Mets." Almost, what was it, a 7-game series for a team that played for like 5-10 baseball?
Yeah, and it's funny that Met team, I think they won the division with like 82 wins. They were having a horrible year, and it wasn't until September that they got hot, and that's when you mentioned Tug McGraw, that you got to believe that was the rallying cry when they were so far behind, and they came back and won the division and ended up, winning in the playoffs against those Cincinnati Redlegs and advancing to the World Series. And, that classic fight between Buddy Harrelson and Pete Rose. I think Pete Rose weighed about 100 pounds more than Buddy. Body slammed him to the ground, broke his collarbone. And, for years, Pete Rose would come back to Shea Stadium and just get unbelievably booed. They hated him in New York City for beating up little Buddy. But that '73 team was great. They did go to Game 7 of the World Series against the mighty Oakland A's. I think Yogi Berra made a strategic decision there that came back to haunt him. He pitched Tom Seaver on 3 days rest, and he ended up losing Game 6. If he had pitched on regular rest, I think they would have won the World Series and would have had another title there. But that 73 team was a terrific team as well. Not the 69 team, but they were pretty good, and they had a chance to win a second title.
Yeah, as far as I remember, Yogi Berra lost faith in Willie Mays, and I think at the end of Game 7, there was a time when he could have put Mays in to pinch hit and didn't, and that was, and so some people thought, well, have you heard about that? Or you have any thoughts about that question?
Willie Mays?
Yeah, that Berra didn't put Mays in to pinch hit at the end of games, near the end of Game 7.
Yeah, well, remember, Willie was not the same player. That was the tail end of his career. And it was actually kind of painful to watch him that year because he just wasn't Willie Mays anymore. He wasn't the say, hey, Willie kid. So I don't think that's a fair criticism. Now, who knows? Maybe Willie would have come through with a big hit, but he just was not the same player. I mean, it was he was nowhere near what he was with the Giants.
What are your thoughts on Bobby Bonilla Day?
Oh, you have to bring that up. Yeah, that's something that has haunted Mets fans for years. You know, the Wilpons gave Bobby Bonilla that ridiculous contract, which is basically an annuity. It goes on for like the rest of his life. Every July, July 1st is Bobby Bonilla Day, and he gets $1 million. It's really one of the great heights in the history of baseball.
Yeah, they see it every year. Mets fans celebrate it in a humorous way. All these years later, should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame?
I think so. I think he's paid his debt to society. Listen, he was a great player. I didn't particularly like him, but boy, he was Charlie Hustle. He was a great player. I think he's paid his debt, and I think it's time to forgive and forget. He's going into baseball for what he did on the field. Okay, what he did off the field, it was bad. He understands it. You can't bet on baseball, but he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, I think.
Do you think it'll happen?
Ooh, unfortunately, I don't. I don't think so. I think that's just sort of etched in stone here that he's not getting in. I think that's totally unfair. Totally unfair. It's like, it's the debate with the steroid guys, too. The steroid guys deserve to get in. I think, that's debate. It depends on, what you think of that situation. Maybe what was more detrimental, Pete Rose betting on baseball or the players juicing and jacking up their numbers? It's an interesting debate.
How about shoeless Joe Jackson?
That's another interesting one. Well, listen, if you're gonna let Pete Rose in, you got to let shoeless Joe Jackson in. They were both part of an ugly part of the game. But that's a fair debate. I think if one goes in, both have to go in. Bobby
Valentine was a star player in the 70s. He had the terrible injury. I know he took the Mets to the World Series, lost in 5 to the Yanks, and then had a real tough year with the Red Sox. So what are your thoughts on Bobby Valentine?
Well, Bobby Valentine's actually a good friend of mine. I've known him a long time. He is currently the athletic director at Sacred Heart University, and I talk to Bobby all the time. And that year in Boston was something he'd like to forget. He was put in an impossible situation there because he took the place of Tito Francona, who was super popular there, who had led the Red Sox to 2 World Series, and he goes in there. And they would not even allow him to pick his own coaching staff. So he inherited Tito's coaches, and that's always a prescription for disaster. And he just never felt comfortable there. The players didn't like him. His personality was a lot different than Tito's, and it was just a bad mix. It was a terrible year for him, and it's something I know we'd like to forget, because he really did have a good career managing the Mets, and before that in Texas with the Rangers.
Well, the time has flown by. Our guest has been Fred Gerteiny, who had 20 years in TV Network Sports in Connecticut. Longtime Mets, Steelers, Knicks fan. Do you have any final words for our audience, Mr. Fred Gerteiny?
Well, you're very blessed to listen to this show every week because Peter is a brilliant sports historian, and it was my honor to be a guest on his show. This was a lot of fun, and I hope people continue to tune in because you're a fun guy, Peter, and you certainly know your sports. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, well, that's very kind things for you to say. I appreciate that, and it's been really wonderful to have you on the show and talk. Yeah, I love. And if I can find a guy talking about 70s sports, and we didn't even get into the 70s Steelers, one of my favorite teams of all time now, in retrospect, not at the time. So thanks so much for being on the show, Mr. Fred Gerteiny.
Well, thank you, Peter, and let's do it again sometime.
Yes, absolutely. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Mr. Fred Gerteiny.
Thank you, Pete.
Okay, take care.